A man stabs a woman on the sidewalk in the middle of a university residence at CPUT. Another man disembowels a fellow worker at Sibanye-Stillwater and then posts the pictures on social media. These are just two of the more horrific crimes committed recently by men in South Africa. Even for a public numbed by ongoing horror, these images have shocked us. But what is going on with men who commit these crimes? It's a knee-jerk reaction to say they must be mentally deranged or evil monsters. But that would suggest these crimes are infrequent. The truth is they are too common. So what is going on that these attacks are so brazen and so brutally committed in public? And I'm joined now by clinical psychologist, author and former police forensic psychologist, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the Sibanye-Stillwater case. In the last hour, our reporter, Hloni Mtimkulu, has managed to gain some information. Obviously, this still has to be tested. But what we know about this man, the alleged attacker, the man who's believed to be in the video, that disemboweled his colleague, is that they had a previous argument in which the suspect lost his eye. He had approached Sibanye-Stillwater to have his grievance dealt with, and also the police, and apparently they had failed him. This is obviously his version of events. Also, we're hearing that apparently his child died in the last week. Then we see these horrific pictures of this man supposedly killing his former colleague and disemboweling him. Now, I know that it's very difficult to diagnose a mental condition from a series of facts without a full sit-down, but does this fall into the category of perhaps someone who might have had some sort of psychotic break, some sort of moment of madness, as we call it?
Well, as you say, the information is limited at this point in time. We do have some history, though, that seems to be, at this point, no reason not to believe it, that there was altercations between the two. There were unhappiness, there were grievances, one being dismissed, allegedly, the offender who committed the murder. And we can't ignore those, because those are also warning signs. And, of course, the second question we'll get into is what was done with that. But yes, the more bizarre the murder is, the more likely we would want to definitely rule out possible mental health issues, might be brief in nature, and of course possibly substances or a combination of both. So I have no doubt that as we go forward, his legal representative is going to want him to be sent to Sterkfontein or wherever for a proper assessment to see at the time of the incident, was he experiencing some kind of mental illness that robbed him of the ability to make decisions of his own accord. So that will definitely have to be explored and can only be explored through that legal referral to a place like Sterkfontein. But yes, I mean, I can just speak from the times where I had strange cases in the police. The more unusual, the disembowelment film in it, the more likely, in my experience, we did have people who had perhaps possible mental health issues. But again, that would have to be tested by an observation process.
Yeah, absolutely. Why would you put it on social media? Is it because you have no intention of trying to evade justice? Because apparently he waited for the police to arrive. Yeah.
So clearly, I mean, he's doing this in sort of, it seems like broad daylight in front of a bunch of people. He's recording it himself, and he's not fleeing the scene. So I think we can safely say, his intention was not to get away with this. Now, whether that is because it was a final act on his behalf, he doesn't care what happens. There's stories about him losing his child, as you say, not too long ago, from a totally, I think, unrelated to this particular process.
So. Yeah.
He's lost his job. He apparently lost an eye.
Yeah.
So a lot of those factors that might make someone feel like, I don't really have much left to live for. So whether I'm spending that time in jail or die in the process of maybe when the police arrive, suicide by cop scenario, that could be some of the explanations for his behavior, after the actual incident took place.
We tend to want to other criminals. We want to believe they are not like us because we would never do that. So we want to believe they're evil or they're completely mad. A situation like this, on the surface of it, this is could it happen to anyone? Could anyone have that moment of madness, that psychotic break? Or are there signs of those fissures?
I don't know whether the psychotic break would be able to be predicted unless he has a history of mental illness and it was flaring up and he had sort of typically has violent behavior in those psychotic processes. But, what we can predict is that there was sounding like a very bad relationship between these two people, and there was back and forth problems, and that it stemmed from the workplace environment. Those are warning signs, and what we see in South African companies is that we don't set up systems to early detect problematic behavior, intervene, assist the person so that they don't go and do something bad. how do we deal with people's grievances? Do we deal with them in a responsible, ethical way, or do we kind of have the attitude, not our problem, bugger you? And that pushes people down that pathway to doing not necessarily something as bizarre as this, but taking processes into their own hands.
Do we add an extra layer because it's men? And I ask that because men, I think, are still, to a certain extent, brought up, big boys don't cry, and women have more license to express their feelings and ask for help when they get it. If we add in the mining culture, it's still very male-dominated. The history of mining in our country is still broken and fractured in many ways. Does that add another layer to it all?
I don't think we can ignore that, and that would have to be looked at. I mean, in general, our prisons are populated by men who've committed violent crimes, not women. So I think whether you want to say that's testosterone, influenced by upbringing and culture, then you have the specific mine culture, which again would be very male-dominated. I do think those are valid things that could be explored. I don't think we should automatically take that as the possible explanation. But yes, I think those are things that could have played a role or an influence. And as I said, hopefully a thorough investigation would get those answers.
If we turn then to the video of the CPUT student being stabbed, we understand, by her partner. I mean, that was utterly horrific. It was in broad daylight. It was filmed by people in the flats. And she was bleeding profusely. And it wasn't just one stabbing and then, oh my God, what have I done? It was this repeated assault. And you could see a couple of men trying to actually come in and clearly trying to intervene and stop it. And they seemed terrified of him as well. Does that just fall into the massive problem of gender-based violence we have, that this is just such a toxic mess? With someone who doesn't seem to have any regard for the fact that he's brutalizing someone in broad daylight, what's going on there? Is that another case of madness, or are there other things at play?
Again, unlikely madness in the sort of clinical sense. Emotions, absolutely. But again, we typically find in incidences of intimate partner murders, it's not as if that's the first time this person's ever behaved in an aggressive way towards their partner. So again, I can put my career on it, there would have been a history of intimate partner violence between these individuals. There would have been threats probably made by this individual. But again, what do we, as our friends of these people, family of these people, co-workers, fellow students, lecturers, what do we do with that information? A lot of organizations say, well, it's private, it's got nothing to do with us. Well, unfortunately, when the murder takes place on your campus, good luck saying it's got nothing to do with us as a campus. Do we have services on our campuses where people who are experiencing this kind of domestic violence can go and not just get help taken out of protection order, because that often increases the level of danger, but where a proper risk assessment is done to say what level of danger is this young lady in, and how do we make sure that it doesn't go that route? And that's where we as South Africans, we think too much in terms of criminal cases, disciplinary hearing, protection orders. Those are not keeping you safe. Those are not safety solutions. They are almost punitive solutions, which invariably, at least for a time being, increase the level of danger. I've never met someone who's happy that they've had a protection order taken out against them. So it definitely increases for a time period the danger towards that person. But so what are we doing about that to make sure that that person is kept safe? And we don't have a workplace violence threat assessment, threat management approach. We have the old-fashioned punish the person, expel them. And as we saw from the Stillwater Sibanye case, getting someone out of your organization does not make you safer. In fact, in some ways, it can make you more dangerous, because now you don't know what the person's up to. And they don't have a job. And you suddenly give them a whole bunch of risk factors that increase the level of danger they might pose. But we seem to think so simplistically as expel the person, fire the person, disciplinary hearing. And those are not keeping people safe.
It's true. And we want to push people away. And we want to see that we see them as monsters. And they're not really, are they?
No. And what we're probably going to start seeing is that people are going to start to realize, actually, my employer, my university actually had a responsibility to have a workplace violence policy in place to help reach out to students and keep them safe on campus. What we want is, if the person does take out a protection order, they should tell their employer, they should tell the campus, that they can then take steps to make sure on the campus, because it doesn't help, nobody else knows about those. And then we're not keeping you safe when you're on our property. And again, you can't say this is a personal thing, because clearly it's brought these organizations into the public media in a very horrible way, which is reputational damage. So organizations really need to wake up and start saying we don't just need a security response, we need a threat assessment and threat management response.
It's a good point, but also, as you say, as society, we need to speak out more. You know, there's a lot of debate about, you know, particularly women caught in very abusive relationships. You can't march in there and expose her. You know, we've had incidents where people have spoken about other people's abusive relationships in public. You can't do that. But there must be layers and ways of offering support. I just don't know if we have enough systems in place, or is it just about being a friend?
I think there has to be the will, firstly, to realize actually this is a workplace issue. It is a campus issue. And then to say we're going to invest a bit of money in training even existing people. It's not like you have to create a huge, massive structure. Let's train our HR, our security, our health and wellness counselors, and have a system in place. Because without the system, these things will fall through the crack. And then afterwards, you'll hear, oh, but he told the lecturer, or he told his colleagues. And you typically hear all this information where everybody knew about it, but
much
nothing
more
happened.
Joining of the dots, pulling information. I have to just squeeze in this last question, because I know that you've spoken to people like Thabo Bester, you've spoken to serial killers, you've interviewed them, and I think you've tried to understand what makes them tick. Looking at that as a holistic group of people, are most of them psychopaths? Can one say, well, there's probably they're psychopaths? Are most of them people who snap? Are most of them ordinary people who just get into a difficult situation? Can you generalize about that?
You can't really. And as you said earlier, people love to kind of label things that maybe it makes us feel more comfortable. Oh, if we put them in a box, you've got a diagnosis. It's like when you're feeling ill and finally the doctor tells you you've got this. You almost feel a relief because you know there's a treatment and a process. You can't put them all in the box, and these people are far more like us than not. But that also means that we then have some insight in how do we perhaps de-escalate the situation. That this person doesn't do something bad to another person. That's a win-win for everybody. But our typical, like I said, our typical responses is punishment, expel. That's a win-lose. And unfortunately, when that person loses, they might lose that last little bit that was keeping them from not doing something incredibly violent to another person. Yeah,
absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. Much appreciated. Author and former police forensic psychologist, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne. Now,